Oops. Hi, this is Paul. I almost knocked over my drink. We're walking through the Heidelberg Catechism. We're on Lord's Day 4. Question and answer 9. But doesn't God do us an injustice by requiring in his law what we are unable to do? No, God created human beings with the ability to keep the law. They, however, provoked by the devil, in willful disobedience, robbed themselves and all their descendants of these gifts. There's a lot to say about this question and answer. People look at it with a great deal of disapproval, often today, but they act in many ways in complete accordance with it, usually according to their own biases. C.S. Lewis begins his book, Mere Christianity, with the question of right and wrong. He begins by noticing that people quarrel. Now, what interests me about these remarks is that man who makes them is not merely saying that the other man's behavior does not happen to please him. He is appealing to some kind of standard of behavior which he expects the other man to know about. The other man very seldom replies, "To hell with your standard." Nearly always does he make out that what he has been doing does not really go against the standard, or that if it does, there is some special excuse. He pretends there is some special reason in this particular case why the person who took the seat first should not keep it, or that things were quite different when he was given that bit of orange, or something has happened, something has turned up which lets him off keeping his promise. It looks, in fact, very much as if both parties had in mind some kind of law or rule of fair play or decent behavior or morality, or whatever you'd like to call it, about which they really agree. And they have. If they had not, they might, of course, fight like animals, but they would not quarrel about the human sense of the world. Quarreling means trying to show that the other person is in the wrong. And there would be no sense in trying to do that unless you and he had some sort of agreement as to what right and wrong were. Just as there would be no sense of saying that footballer had committed a foul unless there was some kind of agreement about the rules of football. This is so amazingly true of human beings. And in fact, just in making this video, if someone chooses to watch it, they might very much take me on in this point and tell me I'm doing it wrong. And in some sense, completely agreeing with what C.S. Lewis has observed. Then we have other standards where we believe that, well, people aren't responsible. But then again, people can't hold to that either. Because it wells up within us that we hold people to a standard. And we imagine that they know the standard. And we just keep doing it again and again and again. Now, if people are skeptical about God, well, this doesn't seem to impact this behavior. Again and again, I find people who claim at least some sort of moral relativism, or at least some moral chaos in the universe, but then again, they can't stop complaining about what other people do. And again, as C.S. Lewis noted, it is always about that they're doing it wrong and they know it's wrong and they should stop. And despite all of the experience of all of our lives, somehow complaining about it ends it. And it does not. Now, what's funny is that at the same time, people imagine that God is somehow unjust for requiring this of us. Now, this week I was watching a video with well, maybe I'll just play it because I can do that in video land. So this is Jordan Peterson talking to Bill Maher.
It just, look, if you're a bad actor, the probability that horrible things are going to come your way is all things considered, quite radically increased. But
yes and no. I mean, nothing bad happened to Saddam Hussein until we captured his ass and hung him. But he had 65 years of being able to act like the most ridiculous tyrant in the world and get away with it. Other people, again, they don't do anything and something bad happens.
Well,
I feel like when people connect their behavior with some sort of punishment or reward, that's childish. That's what, when people go karma, I did a whole thing on this on my show once. What a bunch of bullshit karma. Americans interpret karma to mean like, you took the last parking spot and now shit's going to happen to you. That's Schadenfreude. That's not karma. But that's how people think of it. Karma. Oh, yeah, it's going to come back and get you. No, I'm
Karma,
sorry.
weaponized karma.
Weaponized karma. No. Life is random. Good people get punished for no reason, and bad people go unpunished. You just, yeah, you're...
Okay. Now, of course, if this is the case, one would ask why he complains on his program week after week after week about the behaviors of this group of people or that group of people, as if, again, as Lewis makes the point, there is a standard. He believes there is a standard. In fact, most of the rest of the program he talks about, there's this standard and people have not been keeping it. And, well, okay, what do you do about that? You have the incident of Saddam Hussein. So Saddam Hussein got away with all of these bad things until the very end, and then basically he gets executed by his own people who find him in that spider hole. Is that justice? So here's the question. Do people finally get away with everything? Are all of the sad things that ever happen in the world just everyone gets away with it? My wife lately has been watching a bunch of true crime things, and a lot of people get away with a lot of things. Okay. But does God do us an injustice by requiring in his law what we are unable to do? Okay. Well, and of course people differ with that. And as C.S. Lewis says, people have excuses. Now, in the answer, of course, you have the clue and the understanding, which people, when they make this point, sometimes, and it's usually a controversial point in public, that, well, in fact, this person did these things because of their upbringing. And some people are like, nope, that's no excuse. And to a degree, they're right. But the other side that says, well, it's something about their upbringing that led to this, and we should understand that. And that's right, too. And in fact, the two groups fight about this, but they've both got something right about it. The question is, does God let everyone in the world off the hook for what we do, even though things happen in our past? Should he? And the truth is, I find almost nobody thinks that neither God nor a criminal justice system of a state or even people's friends and neighbors should just turn a blind eye to the bad that they do, even if we can all acknowledge that maybe they had bad things in their childhood. So even though this question people sort of look at and they find it controversial, if you sort of pause it and you look around at people, you begin to see whether or not you find this question controversial, the world is actually this way. And in fact, the world demands that, well, certainly God must address the great injustices of the world. And certainly when we look at situations that are highly visible, Stalin, Mao, Hitler, Saddam Hussein, well, if you're Bill Maher, you just have to say, he got away with it. Okay. Is that the kind of world you want to live in? He might say, well, but that's the kind of world we have. So what does that lead us to? Miroslav Volf lived through the Yugoslavian Civil War. And of course, part of what made communism was that it set aside the idea of God and said there is no afterlife. And it tried to do that civilizationally, culturally. The difficulty that happens in a situation like that is if you say, okay, there's no God in the universe to hold Saddam Hussein to a standard. All right. What then? Well, then I have to settle the score. Okay. Now, maybe if we're talking about Saddam Hussein and people that are sort of way up on the hierarchy, we might think that. But what about your neighbor? What about how your neighbor sees you? This is what Volf wrote. One could object that it is not worthy of God to wield a sword. Is God not love, long-suffering, and all-powerful love? A counter question could go something like this. Is it not a bit too arrogant to presume that our contemporary sensibilities about what is compatible with God's love are so much healthier than those of the people of God throughout the whole history of Judaism and Christianity? Recalling my arguments about self-immunization of the evildoer, one could further argue that in a world of violence, it would not be worthy of God not to wield the sword. If God were not angry at injustice and deception and did not make the final end of violence, God would not be worthy of our worship. So this gets into issues of justice, and sometimes people put social in front of justice to talk about public communal things. People are very excited often about social justice, but what exactly are they excited about? Where there should be retribution, people should be held accountable. True. But how and who? Because one of the things that we see is almost every time we try to hold someone else accountable, even in small relational affairs, it doesn't go well. The other person tells us we're not a good judge. We look at them and say, you're biased about your own behavior. And they turn it around and say, you're biased about your own behavior. And off the quarreling goes. Here, however, I am less interested in arguing that God's violence is not worthy of God than in showing that it is beneficial to us. Atland has rightly drawn, that's a philosopher that he's citing, Atland has rightly drawn our attention to the fact that in a world of violence, we are faced with an inescapable alternative, either God's violence or human violence. Most people who insist on God's nonviolence cannot resist on using violence themselves or tacitly sanctioning its use by others. They deem the talk of God's judgment irreverent, but think nothing of entrusting judgment into human hands, persuaded, presumably, that this is less dangerous and more humane than to believe in a God who judges. That we should bring down the powerful from their thrones, Luke 1, Mary's song, seems responsible. That God should do the same, as the song of that revolutionary virgin explicitly states, seems crude. And so violence thrives, secretly nourished by a belief in a God who refuses to wield the sword. My thesis, that the practice of nonviolence requires a belief in divine vengeance, will be unpopular with many Christians, especially theologians in the West. To the person who is inclined to dismiss it, I suggest imagining that you are delivering a lecture in a war zone, which is where a paper that underlies this chapter was originally delivered. Among your listeners are people whose cities and villages have been first plundered, then burned, and leveled to the ground, whose daughters and sisters have been raped, whose fathers and brothers have had their throats slit. The topic of the lecture, a Christian's attitude towards violence. The thesis, we should not retaliate since God is perfect, non-coercive love. Soon you will discover that it takes the quiet of a suburban home for the birth of the thesis that human nonviolence corresponds to God's refusal to judge. In a scorched land soaked in the blood of the innocent, it will invariably die. And as one watches it die, one will do well to reflect about many other pleasant captivities of the liberal mind. Now, someone might turn this around and say, okay, but don't you Calvinists say that even those who died were not innocent? Yes, we do. They might not be perfectly innocent. They might be relatively innocent. But we're not saying that karma is the only standard. Okay? That's sort of the first rung of the ladder, that when Americans just start thinking about justice, that's sort of the first place they go. And they're not alone in that first place they go. That's sort of the lowest common denominator when someone starts thinking that there is a law, there is a lawgiver, and there is judgment and justice built into the universe. Then they think, okay, well, it's tit for tat. You do one thing, you get punished. You do right, you get rewarded. And there is, in fact, a layer of truth to that. Bill Maher takes a step further and says, but don't we often see that, in fact, people who are horrible sometimes get good treatment in the world, and some people who are very good get bad treatment in the world? The Bible is not unaware of this. In fact, you will find Psalms and Hebrew prophets that go on and on and on about this. Often I use the illustration of the book of Job and then jump to the illustration of Jesus. Because in Jesus, of course, we see a man that Christianity looks at as the perfect man who, in fact, received horrible treatment, not only at the hands of, let's say, the Romans, the imperial Romans who were over the area, but even his own brother Israelites. So, how does this all work? Does God permit such disobedience and rebellion to go unpunished? Well, let me change that around a little bit. Should God permit such disobedience and rebellion to go unpunished? Most people would say no. Most people want God to be angry. And in fact, if you watch enough court TV, you'll see this. Miroslav Volf's point is being made. God is terribly angry with the sins we are born with, as well as the sins we personally commit. Now, right away, that's those sins we are born with. Well, what does that mean? Well, have you ever known someone that is born with a sin or born with something that has missed the mark and that provokes no anger in you? Now, hi, this is Paul. A bunch of you will know who I mean when I say Uber Boyo. This is a YouTube channel that was doing a lot of stuff with Jungian stuff. I talked to him long time ago. I used to have a partner in the conversation. I think the partner dropped out, and it's just down to Uber Boyo. I think he's done quite well on YouTube. He posted something on Twitter today that I thought was worth looking at. There's this video that he had of this place in Bali where dudes are working out, and I'll just read.
No junk food, no women.
No junk food, no women, no parties, no alcohol. This place banned everything that is not making men grow in an exclusive venue hidden in the mountains of Bali that is perfect for the guys to focus 100% on their goals without distractions. It was a huge, fully equipped gym, a spa, hot and cold pools, a wood-burning sauna, and a team of private chefs that cook healthy food any time of day. Hundreds of successful businessmen, top-tier athletes, self-improvement enthusiasts have joined the community and completely changed their lives, but not anyone can join. To enter, you need to submit an application to prove that you are dedicated enough to be part of the community. Would you come here? It's totally believable. It's 100% believable. And Uber Boyo writes this: after the death of God rendered faith incongruent, each generation has to rediscover monasteries for themselves. For the boomers, it was hippie communes. For millennials, go to Bali and live in a self-improvement shack. And I thought, yeah, he's naming what's going on. After I guess this will release on Friday morning. After the conference, I've been doing a ton of thinking about the conference and what it means and who the people are, and especially the question of ideals. Because obviously implicit in this Bali getaway, you have an ideal that people are chasing. And one of the things so the videos for the conference, just sent them all. I have them all right now. I want to give priority to Grail Country to release them, and then I'll probably release them sort of in between spaces on my channel so that people can see them. If you look at the Jordan Peterson thing, a big part of his thing for a very long time have been ideals. So I was continuing to watch Matthew Pajot's video this morning.
This is what I don't like. This other book would be kind of dependent on the other one. I don't like doing that. I really don't. Like, this book is not going to be dependent on my first book. It will help a lot if someone read my first book and reads the second one for sure. It helps, but I'm gonna write it as a
It makes me comfortable knowing that I'm not the only rambler on the internet. Because when I watch videos of me doing exactly this, it drives me crazy. When I watch him do it, I'm endeared by it.
if I assume nobody has read my first book that's reading this second book. Um, so I haven't decided yet. When I start writing it, I'll see. But just by experience, I'll see, is this a good idea or not?
And of course, of the little universe of characters that come through YouTube through us, a lot of people regard Matthew Pajot as the real deal because he's not sort of going away to this exclusive place in Bali to, he's living in the woods. I mean, this isn't an option for him, and there's always something that's sort of beautiful about the voluntariness, and there's also something that's just sort of I don't have the quite word about the voluntariness.
To have these two subjects in one book, or do I have to split it? I might do both. I might do two, and then also I'll maybe publish a version that has both in it in case someone wants, because it's useless to have. If you just want one, you just want one. I mean, I don't.
And again, I know he's talking while he's thinking, and a new thought comes, and it comes out. I'm totally there. I'm just doing it right now, making some of you crazy.
To force people to read what they don't want to read, but so if someone just wants dreams and doesn't want Bible, maybe I could just do the dream part. I haven't decided yet. It'll happen when it happens, Yeah, so that's what I'm gonna do now in the next during the winter. Hopefully the winter is not gonna be too hard this year. Last year was really hard. Yeah, but I learned a lot. That's the thing. I learned a lot from last year's problems. And I learned important things, like really simple things about.
One of the things that I talked about, I mentioned a few times in the plenary sessions, but Rod Hare and I have talked about this a lot. The important quality of the involuntary. And that is so deeply against our cultural intuition. Now one might argue that Matthew Pajot could have an outstanding career with a YouTube channel, and with he could be a public celebrity just like his brother Jonathan. And again, I love Jonathan, and I haven't met Matthew, but I'm sure I'd love him. And some of you will say, that's because you love everyone. To be loved by Paul Vanderklay, not a high distinction. You wouldn't believe the people that I dislike that Paul Vanderklay still loves. Fair enough. And so what is voluntary and what is involuntary? Part of what's going on here is, of course, that which grabs our attention, that which seems beautiful to us. And just like, I'm still looking out for Grim Grizz. I have no idea what time he's going to get here. And so I don't know how to plan my afternoon, because Grizz was like, I'll be there. And he said, I'll be there late. And then for a while, he's like, I'm at Crescent City. I'm thinking, yeah, Crescent City's a pretty big hike. So I don't know how many times he's going to stop. I don't know. He's got the dog with him. I don't know if anybody else is with him. But so anyway. And so these dudes, they go out and they live in this beautiful place in Bali, and they have this beautiful gym, and they have, they have an internet connection. Perhaps they're sitting there working on their computer, and this is just super, super exclusive and expensive. And I made this point too about, we have these hierarchies, and they dream to be here when, guess what? You can be poor in the woods. And there's no line for it. And you can, I don't know if we know very little about Matthew, and maybe, and in his own wisdom and perhaps good common sense, he wants to keep it that way. God bless him. You know, he just tells this story.
About the concept, by the way, that we've talked about, the concept of the firstborn and the secondborn and all that stuff, that pattern there. I learned a whole lot about that because of the problems I had during the winter. I don't know. Do you want me to talk about? Do you want me to?
Yeah, sure.
Because it's related. It's all related anyway. It's related to the sleep part, the sleep stuff too. Okay, so, okay, so I guess I could say what happened to me. What happened to me is my stove stopped working. Okay, or malfunctioned. Okay.
All right. Most people, not most people, the ones we all look up to, pay a lot of money to, and Matthew Pajot's living in the woods, and his stove stops working.
And then I was in big trouble, because winter time you don't want to not have heat. So, and it's unbelievable the problems I got from this. I tried to fix it myself. I tried all kinds of things, and eventually I just had to buy another one. So that's a big deal for me because I'm not rich. This is like using all my money, just to survive. So, I bought another one. And then all these struggles, basically, I learned something really important, and it kind of revealed to me the meaning of the whole Cain and Abel story.
So in other words, you can go to Bali, be with the best and the elite, and spar and do everything, or you can live poor in the woods and just pay attention.
So I can try to explain it. It's really simple, but my way of thinking is the real truths, the real powerful, deep truths are really simple. But the problem is not that we don't understand things. I've said this before, but it's that we neglect the importance of certain things. We neglect them. It's like we don't think it's meaningful. We think it's just some aspect of reality that is not important. So it's not that we don't get it or don't understand it, is that we don't pay attention to it enough, and we don't put it high enough in our ideas that we use to interpret phenomena.
Now again, we've got salience landscaping. We've got all of these fancy terms, and we know exactly what he means. James Wood, who teaches at Redeemer College, a CRC-affiliated college in Hamilton, Ontario. I believe it's in Hamilton, or it's Lancaster. I don't remember. It's in Ontario. It's in that area. Wrote a wonderful piece. He basically wrote a little Randos convo where he shares the story of, I remember the moment I told myself I would never talk to my dad again. I was 16 years old, and my dad's adoptive parents had just surprised me with my first car, a bright yellow used Geo Tracker. I remember that car. I would soon trade it for a truck. After a slight disagreement, we split into separate vehicles to drive back to my mother's house. In the other car, my dad was drinking while driving my little brother, and I drove my new car with his new wife. When we arrived at my mom's house, she chastised my dad because we were much later than expected. At this time, we did not have cell phones, and she noticed the alcohol on his breath. He got out and yelled at her, and then he took my keys and told me he was going to tell my grandparents I didn't want the car. For the first time in my life, I gave verbal expression to the anger I had internalized for years. Get out of here. You can't treat us like this. We don't need you. I've come from a stock of relationships quitters. During my childhood, pretty much everyone in my life had divorced at least once. Extended family connections were strained, long-term friends were non-existent, and moves were frequent. Over time, I came to adopt a conception of freedom that had destroyed the lives of many around me, and which would threaten to destroy my own as well, the popular idea of freedom as unconstrained choice. and this amazing Substack that some of you will just be all over. You shouldn't be afraid of ghosts. They're very loving creatures. A ghost touched my honker when I was a young man. There's a line to draw you into the rest of it. Use that as a sermon introduction. I was 19 years old and worked for a summer in a sawmill in my hometown when these words were spoken to me by a man named John Bell. I thought about using a pseudonym, but I doubt he would care. Just know there's an actual guy in the world named John Bell. I'm sure there's plenty of them. Who is this part of the story? This part of the story is about. Big John, as he was called, was a millwright and a West Virginian who spoke with a yodel. While every subsequent West Virginian I have met has insisted that this is not a thing, I can only assume that Big John hailed from an earlier and more cinematic version of the state now lost to self-conscious modernity. Apart from his yodeling manner of speech, he was known far and wide for having a honker, roughly the size of a can of Pringles. Not that I ever saw it, but other men swore by it with envy, including my own father. That day we had been tasked with replacing the length of chain on a chip transfer chute out of the docks. On the way, Big John had almost driven us into a forklift. I grabbed my heart and said, "Jesus, John, I thought there were ghosts there for a second." We were ghosts there for a second. Having completely forgotten the context, given the length of time that had passed, and having a hard time understanding what he was saying given the yodel, I simply responded, "What?" John unfolded a remarkable and heroic tale from his own youth, right after he had graduated from high school some 40-odd years ago. Back when he had been my age, he'd gone to work at a logging camp in the middle of nowhere. Him and another young man made fast friends and bunked down together in one of a series of small cabins. Totally isolated from everyone, they slept there each night in tiny but separate rooms. That was when the ghost appeared. Infrequently, but always in the middle of the night, a dark specter hovered at the end of John's bed, reaching down and gently held his honker through a thin sheet. 19 and full of myself, more concerned with being correct than kind, I asked a whole slew of follow-up questions. What was the roommate like? Did he go out much? Did the roommate have a girlfriend or a wife somewhere? Did he even talk about women at all? Had John even seen the roommate look at a woman with sexual desire? Had the ghost stopped appearing when the roommate was away? The answer unfolded to my expectations. I slowly led John to the conclusion that it had been inevitable from the start. He had almost surely been sexually assaulted by his roommate. I let him know as much in a roundabout way. I will never forget his response nor his manner. Nah, he was a Presbyterian. Entirely dismissed, my careful probing all undone, Big John had an air as if he had immediately solved a Rubik's Cube thrown at him randomly from out of the crowd, or stunned an audience of math professors with some irrefutable cunning and yet ultimately simple proof. There's no possible way to probe further. His defense was unassailable. Of course his roommate hadn't sexually assaulted him because his roommate was a Presbyterian. A Presbyterian! You would have to be a complete fool not to see it. The only explanation that remained was supernatural. Having delivered this killing blow, John returned to his work truck, shaking his head and laughing at me for my ignorance. He drove off, leaving me to die a sort of intellectual death there by the river. You got to read the whole thing. It's amazing. And some of you will love it. Some of you will hate it. But it's pretty darn good. I'll put both links to both of these down below. Somebody, I should find the comment. I don't want to take the time to find the comment. Grim Grizz is going to be here any time, and I don't know how this evening is going to go. I'm going to be Griswold grimmed into chaos this evening, and I have no idea what to think. We all have our imagination of what's good and true and beautiful. And one way or another, maybe, just maybe, we strive for it. And some people's paths are simple, They live in the woods. They have their thoughts to themselves. They generously share them with us, even if they know, well, boy, this might disrupt our lives. The world is weird, but the world is also a very strange and interesting place. And as Matthew Peugeot said, if you pay attention, you can learn something. And what strikes me and has always struck me about the world is you don't need to go into a place where there are just super smart people. You can find beauty almost anywhere. You can find friends almost anywhere. And I'm sure the dudes spending all of their money doing this and time doing this, they have this ideal, and yeah, shoot, if this place, I don't know if I would fit into that place at all. I would find it interesting. But what I find as I meet people is that there is something to the person that can find interest, satisfaction, wisdom, insight just about any place they go. One of the things Peterson would say in his early days was he would talk about, and I still, in my imagination, I really lament the fact that he is no longer a clinician, that he no longer has to sit in a room with patients. And one of the things he said that really gave him a lot of credibility in my mind was he said, if you sit there and listen, you can find something interesting in almost anyone. Now Graham gave a talk at this conference that is going to infuriate a lot of people. I just know it. And he was pretty hard on orthodoxy, even though he himself is Orthodox. And many of the people that he quoted were Orthodox themselves. And, Graham has a family. He's trying to make ends meet. He's living in the world. He's paying attention. He's trying to be a poet. Sherry said she had to work really hard to get him there.
I had the privilege of being with a couple people who knew nothing about the corner and estuary, like zero. They didn't know who the speakers were. I mean, I think they knew you, Paul, but I don't think they knew anybody else. They didn't know who anybody was. They had no context for anything. And one of them was my sister who came with me. And the other one was Graham. And part of the reason I wanted...
She said Graham, not Grim.
Graham there. And you have no idea how hard it was to get him there. Between him and Nate, it was like Nate wasn't answering my messages. Graham wasn't answering my messages, and I just kept going. I just kept, and then at one point it looked like Graham wasn't going to be able to make it, and I was just like, Lord, what is happening? This has to happen. And part of the reason for it was because I really knew Graham needed it, and he did need it. I can say
he had some great insights. His presentation was a bit like watermelon. There were some seeds that I had to kind of pick through, but overall, what was juicy and sweet was really, really
well. He
nice.
Was my highlight, not because I'm a super fan.
Well,
which helps.
You function at that wavelength anyway. That's your wavelength.
I totally do.
Let me throw real quick, Nico. Sorry, I don't want to.
Money is the kind of thing that develops hierarchies, and exclusivity is the kind of thing that attracts us. But what makes this place in Bali so tremendous is because it's exclusive. And this is a version of a speech I gave not the talk I gave, but one of the little things that I said. I said it to my little estuary group, and then I made a version of it to the full group. So last time Jordan Peterson came, or maybe the time before, 2 times ago, and Jordan Peterson came to the area, I wrote him, I said, oh, you're coming to the area. I don't remember exactly what I said. He said, oh, I'll send you a couple of tickets and then a pass to see him backstage. I don't even remember how we started doing this. We've done it the last 2 times. And so I go to this event, and it's so fun because I go to these events in Northern California, and I'm sure people in the corner would think that I would be recognized. And the truth is, there's usually 1 or maybe 2 people at the event that actually come up to me and say, oh, you make videos about Jordan Peterson. Most of them don't have anything to do with the corner. The corner is way smaller than many of you think it is. And then especially the first time, like the thing wasn't connected. I needed a backstage pass so I could get back, and then other people heard me working on this, and they're like, oh, you're gonna get to go backstage and talk to Jordan. It's, yeah, I'm gonna go backstage and talk to Jordan. And it's like, oh. We're on these screens, and we mindlessly develop these hierarchies. You have an ideal you are striving for, whether you know it or not. And the truth is, and what I probably love most about the corner is its randomness. Now, some of you know that we've had a little drama recently, and I'm not a stranger to drama. In fact, I'm so much not a stranger to drama. I also know that I often get a lot of things wrong. It's just true. People get upset with each other. They have a little fight. Some people don't talk to each other. This is people. This is people. But that idea that Jordan talked about, I have found to also be true. There are very few people that if you just pay enough attention to them, in fact, there are very few things that if you just pay enough attention to them, they don't get bottomless. So, of course, Karen was one of the speakers of the conference. And I think for some people, Karen was a surprising delight. It was very interesting. My little estuary group referred more to her speech than to any of the other speakers. She made such solid points of wisdom. And what I love about what she did, that she'll tell the story about how, she found Jordan Peterson, and then she found me, and she drove all the way out to our Jordan Peterson meetup, her and her daughter, just to meet me, and asked me what she should do. So I don't know what you should do. Start a YouTube channel. And she thought about it and thought, well, I don't like to monologue on camera. I can't do that like Vanderclay does, but I do want to learn about the universe, and I want to get conversations between people I find very interesting. And what's so cool is that almost everybody does this if you're in this YouTube space. I want to see this person talk to this person and this person talk to this person. They do all of that. Well, Karen went out and did it. And what was so delightful about this time was just getting to a little bit of extra time to spend with Karen, to meet her daughter, and just to hear her think and hear her talk. And one of the things that struck me was so many people in this little corner after the last 7 years I just have so much, I'm just in amazement of what God has done. And it's so funny because Karen sort of comes across as sort of, aw, shucks, but then she's been listening and absorbing these guys. And then she picks this up at the conference. And then, of course, this blew away my group after she had said it.
Here with Dr. Michael Levin and with Jordan Hall. Michael Levin is a developmental and synthetic biologist, a pioneer of disruptive technologies. And a person might say, why are we putting these two people together? But I was speaking at a conference this weekend, and I gave a talk about how art can be a translator key for other arenas. And a lady came running up to me afterwards and she said, "Oh my goodness, you helped me so much." And I thought, how could that kind of a talk be helpful to anybody? But she said, "You made me remember something from many, many years ago." She said, "When I was younger, anytime I would go to a party, I would always ask the question, what is it that you've learned or that you do where you have gotten so familiar with it and that you found out that there is no bottom?" And so I said, "Well, for you, what is that?" And she said, "Milk. There's no bottom to milk." And when I discovered that, I decided to be a cheesemaker. And then I met a guy who was a hairdresser, and I asked him, and he said, "Hair, no bottom to hair." And then she said, "I met a painter, and I thought he was like an artist, but no, he painted houses." And he said, "Paint, there's no bottom to paint." So what I take that to mean is that once you get into an arena and you get down to the deep truth of that arena, that allows you to have a lens that's going to help you to discover truth in other arenas. So that's why I'm putting you two together.
And of course, that's on YouTube, and you can watch the whole thing. And I haven't had a chance to watch it. It's like 6 videos in the last 2 days appeared. It's like, oh, I have to watch that. Fortunately, Sam got in early, and I watched him and Alistair McGrath, which was astounding. But this is what I mean. You know, this world is sending all kinds of people to the ends of the earth. And God bless them in Bali. I'm sure it's a transformative experience, and I hope it's really cool, and it sounds wonderful, and I'll never have the wallet for it. And part of me's happy about that. Matthew Peugeot was out in the woods with his stove, and his stove breaks, and he has to mostly clear out the bank account so that he can pay for the stove. James Wood is born in a shitty family. And that stuff he's gonna have to overcome it. He's gonna have to surmount it. And he will. This guy, some guy, has the kinds of stories that some of you die for. But he didn't go to Bali for them. They were there just where he was. Graham, I just can't wait for the reactions to Graham. Oh, boy. But he was making similar points. Now, there's a lot we could go into his talk, and I won't. But, you know, part of his point was that, well, it's the same point as this. And it's the same point that Karen was making, that, yes, this is a world of suffering. It is also a world of immense glory. And, well, I always go back to Isaiah 6. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. Way up here. The whole earth is full of his glory. He's put glory in milk. He's put glory in hair. He's put glory in paint. He's put glory in the people that annoy you, the people that trigger you, the people that do all sorts of things. And you know, God bless these people out there in their thing.
Anyone can join. To enter,
No, I don't want any. Okay. Out there in their thing, you know, apply. I'm sure it's awesome. But he shines in all that's fair. And if you just pay a little attention and maybe ask God to show you, ask for his spirit that can reveal what's going on in the world, and you find that milk is bottomless and paint is bottomless and hair is bottomless, and of course Levin will have his electroceuticals, and Jordan Hall will have his disruptive technology. Just thank God for this beautiful world. And when you're in a scrap, just leave a little part of your heart that looks at that adversary that has so annoyed you and say, yeah, they've done me wrong, or this or that. But just leave a little part in your heart that says they're an image bearer of God. And so I guess I can share the other thing I did on Twitter this afternoon. Did I pin it? What's pinned? Yeah, I did pin it. I took a bunch of you pointed me at the Aaron McIntyre and Benjamin Boyce conversation. And there was some cool stuff in that conversation. And, well, maybe I'll just play it because I can.
Here, knocking that. Like, I'm now personally involved with, share meals with, had drinks with. But until I have made that in my real life connection, it is significantly different than people who I only know on like Twitter DMs or those kind of things. And then there's another level of abstraction between like complete anons. And as somebody who started as an anon, I'm not here, knocking that at all. I'm just saying there is a difference.
Don't go Peterson on us.
Yeah, exactly. But there is a difference between even just completely anon interactions. And people recognize, again, as people who are trying to organize in real life, we have recognized this. Guys who are putting together the old Core Glory Club and the Skildings, they've recognized that the first thing is sharing just face-to-face conversations, not just being a JPEG, and then being in real life. These are all different steps that build trust, that build community in a real way. And so there is a certain level of human connection that is occurring right now. But there are people who live their entire lives, as you pointed out, in this very parasocial bubble because they're in very unhealthy.
And it struck me as they were talking. It's like, you're seeing the problem, and well, what are you going to do about it?
Because they believe the thing on the internet is a real human interaction when it isn't at all.
You have an intense weekend like this, and some of you really loved your estuary group, and you're like, I want this thing to spread. Be careful what you wish for. Because some of you, if you think about whoever you're fangirling over, it could be Jordan Peterson or some Orthodox monk somewhere in Mount Athos, or maybe someone who does Roman Catholic house church. The thing you would like most about these people would be, wouldn't it be great to sit in a room with only like 2 or 3 or 4 people and have an in-depth conversation where I can know and be known? If your estuary is 4 or 5 people and you walk out of there feeling you've been seen, you've been heard, you have shared life, praise God, your group is small.
Freddie came by this afternoon, and Freddie's been a teacher of mine in some of these ways because, he can drive me crazy. His mother could drive me crazy. And Freddie's got all the time in the world. He really does. And he's always just trying to figure out how to fill it. And a big way to fill it is he calls Pastor Paul, or he stops by the church, or he calls first and he asks permission. He's not bad about it. If we can get to the point to see the glory around us, it might be your spouse, it might be your child, it might be your annoying neighbor, it might be that other person on the other side of the TL screen that is doing everything wrong. Just find a little something about them that's beautiful and meditate on that. Cost you a little bit of time, probably isn't costing you any money, but you can learn wisdom from it. Go ahead and give that a shot, at least before you pay all that money to go to the retreat in Bali.